The first snow came quietly, like a whispered secret between the wind and the land. At first, it was just a change in the air, a crisp edge that made the grass snap under hoof and turned the breath of every creature into visible puffs of silver. Then came the flurries, drifting down like ash from some distant frozen sky. It didn't matter that no one saw it. For young Rowan, the colt barely passed his second summer. It was nothing short of magic. Rowan had never seen snow before. Born in the early spring under a canopy of fresh blossoms, he had known only green pastures, warm rains, and the rich, endless scent of sun-warmed earth. His world had been motion and color. Wildflowers swaying in the wind, bees buzzing between the tall grasses, and the sound of other horses thundering across the hills with the wind tangled in their manes. His mother, Lyra, had taught him everything. He knew where to find shelter, how to listen to the trees for signs of change, and most importantly, how to run. But even she, wise and calm as the moon, could not prepare him for what was coming. The snow fell heavier by the afternoon. Rowan stood near the edge of the forest, ears twitching as flakes began to catch in his mane and lashes. He blinked rapidly and shook his head, snorting at the tickle. All around him the world softened, edges blurred, colors dulled. Even sound seemed muffled, like a thick quilt had been laid over the land. He took a tentative step forward, hooves crunching the snow beneath. Then another. Then he broke into a sudden canter, tossing his head and kicking up flurries behind him like a pup learning to play. His energy was a wildfire, untamed, joyous, boundless. The older horses watched from the shelter of the trees, their breath fogging in the chill air. "Easy, Rowan," Lyra called softly, stepping out just enough that her voice could reach him. "Pace yourself." But he didn't hear her, not really. He galloped through the white field, each movement carving new lines into the unbroken snow. The cold kissed his skin but didn't sink into it. Not yet. He didn't understand that it would change everything. Lyra trotted forward and caught up with him easily. She always did. She bumped her shoulder against his and nodded toward the shelter of the trees. "Come now," she said gently. "The snow is just beginning. There's more to come." Rowan glanced upward again. The sky was a shifting blanket of gray clouds, rolling like slow waves. He flicked his ears, reluctant but trusting, and followed her back to the herd. That night, the snow didn't stop. By morning, the world was transformed. Rowan woke with his legs tucked beneath him in the soft hollow he'd made in the straw-filled shelter beside his mother. Outside, everything was white. Trees coated in ice, fence posts buried. The old wooden barn roof bowed under the weight of new snow. The humans moved slowly through the yard, their boots crunching and voices muffled by scarves and hats. The ranch had been home to his herd for generations. It wasn't large, but it was safe. And the humans here, though strange and slow compared to horses, were kind. They fed, brushed, and cared for them with a quiet, steady rhythm. Rowan didn't understand the full depth of human lives, but he recognized the one called Jonah. Tall, gentle, with a beard like dry grass and eyes that always seemed to smile, even when his face didn't. Jonah had helped deliver him the night he was born, and though the man didn't speak his language, Rowan trusted him almost as much as he trusted Lyra. Jonah appeared that morning with two other ranch hands, hauling hay bales from the barn with extra effort. The snow was knee-deep, even for a man. "Winter's hit us hard this year," one of them muttered. Jonah nodded but said nothing. He was like that. Quiet. Thoughtful. Rowan watched as the man scattered feed along the fence line and laid extra straw in the shelter. When their eyes met, Jonah paused and gave a slow nod. Rowan felt something stir in his chest, a flicker of understanding. A message passed not in words, but in the way beings who live close to the earth know things: weather, danger, change. Stay close, the nod seemed to say. That afternoon, the wind picked up. It came down from the mountains in long, hollow sighs, carrying the weight of ice and urgency. Lyra moved the herd deeper into the tree line where the pines stood thick and close, their branches forming a kind of natural roof. Rowan followed, unsure why, but trusting. Snow fell sideways now, whipping, through the gaps in the trees and stinging any exposed skin. The world was no longer white and still, it was fierce, relentless, hungry. Rowan pressed close to Lyra. She lowered her head and spoke calmly. "This is a true storm. It won't be easy." "What do we do?" he asked. "We stay together. We keep still, and we wait." Rowan looked around. The trees swayed under the force of the wind. Somewhere in the distance he could hear the groan of wood splitting. Maybe a barn door, maybe a branch. It was impossible to tell. But then something else. A sound that didn't belong. A shout. He lifted his head sharply. "Did you hear that?" Lyra, tensed beside him. Her ears swiveled, trying to isolate it. Another voice. Fainter this time. Muffled by wind and snow. "A human," she said quietly. "Out there." Rowan took a step forward. "Should we go?" Lyra blocked him with her body. "No, it's too dangerous." "But they're lost. They'll have shelter. A house. Warmth. Not if they're shouting." Lyra didn't respond immediately. She knew the storm's danger. She had seen horses lost in less than this. Whiteout winds that swallowed sound and sight, frostbite that crept through hooves and ears without warning. No, she wouldn't let Rowan charge out on a whim, but Rowan was already moving. Just a step, then another. His hooves crunched the snow that was piling higher with each hour. "Rowan, stop!" Lyra called. "You're not ready!" He turned to look back at her. The snow stuck to his lashes now, melted in small streaks down his face. But what if they need help? She took a step toward him, but hesitated. He wasn't a colt anymore. Not truly. He was young, yes. Impulsive, certainly. But there was something in his stance now, something steady. "Then don't go far," she said softly. "Don't go blind." He nodded and turned toward the wind. The world beyond the grove was chaos. Rowan had never known such cold. It sliced through his coat, curled under his mane, bit at the edges of his ears. The wind howled across the open pasture like a living thing, screaming through the fence posts and whipping up walls of white that danced and roared. But he could still hear it. A voice. Weak. Intermittent. But there. Help! It came again, carried by a break in the wind. Rowan turned toward the sound and began moving, muscles burning from the effort of lifting each hoof through the deep snow. He couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. The world was a swirling, glowing white void. Then, a shape. At first it seemed like just another snow-covered rock, but as Rowan approached, he saw it move, a bundle of fabric, a hand, a head buried beneath a scarf. The traveler. They were curled, tightly, barely moving, covered in a thick layer of snow. Their gloved hand twitched, then went still again. Rowan stood beside them and let out a sharp whinny. The figure stirred faintly. "Horse?" The voice was hoarse and broken. Rowan nudged their shoulder, trying to urge them to move. But they were too cold, too far gone. He remembered the stories the older horses told, how humans freeze, how they can't stay still. He nudged again, harder this time. The traveler's eyes fluttered open, barely. They met his for only a moment, and something passed between them. Then Rowan turned. He began to walk away, pausing only to look back and make sure they followed. The traveler didn't move. Rowan whinnied again, this time longer, more urgent. A minute passed, then two, and then movement, slow, trembling, yabas. Traveler reached out and began crawling after him. Rowan led slowly, glancing back every few steps. The wind threatened to separate them again and again, but he waited, always waited, until the figure crawled closer, until they reached the fence line, then the trees, finally the grove. Lyra saw them first. Her eyes widened in disbelief. Rowan? He pushed forward, guiding the traveler toward the wooden lean-to the ranchers had built for emergencies. It wasn't warm, not really, but it would block the wind. There was straw. Shelter. The traveler collapsed just inside. From the ranch house, a beam of light suddenly appeared, cutting through the storm. Jonah's flashlight. They had seen. The man broke into a run. Rowan stepped aside as Jonah reached the figure and knelt. He shouted something toward the house, words Rowan couldn't understand. Then Jonah looked up, directly at Rowan, and just for a moment his face changed. Not with shock or disbelief, with awe, as if he knew, as if he understood. That night, the storm howled for hours. But inside the shelter, the traveler lay wrapped in blankets. Saved. Alive. And Rowan stood nearby, flanks steaming, legs trembling, but heart full. He had felt the pull of instinct, the call of something deeper than fear, and answered it. The storm raged long into the night. It tore at the trees and clawed at the corners of the barn with ice-tipped fingers, howling like a pack of wolves hunting the last warmth from the earth. Yet in the small lean-to shelter at the edge of the pasture, where a miracle had just unfolded, all was quiet. Jonah knelt beside the young traveler, wrapping them in every available layer of warmth he could find. Wool blankets, saddle pads, even his own coat stripped off without a second thought. His breath misted as he worked, lips pressed into a tight line, mind already calculating. Hypothermia? Frostbite? Dehydration? He didn't know how long they'd been out there. No one did. But Jonah knew one thing for certain. They wouldn't have survived if not for Rowan. The young horse stood just a few feet away, barely sheltered himself, watching with wide, alert eyes. His legs were coated in snow up to the knees, and his chest rose and fell in deep, labored breaths. The cold clung to him like a second coat, but still he didn't move. "Hey there, buddy," Jonah murmured without turning, as he tucked a final blanket around the traveler's shoulders. "You did something incredible tonight." Rowan blinked slowly. Jonah finally stood and approached him, moving slowly, hands open and low, the way you'd approach a scared animal. But Rowan didn't flinch. He stood his ground, trembling slightly, steam rising from his body. "You okay?" Jonah whispered. He laid a hand gently against Rowan's neck. The young horse didn't pull away. "You're freezing," he muttered. "But you brought someone home. You did it." Rowan exhaled softly, his breath ghosting between them. Jonah didn't say more. He just stood there, one hand resting on Rowan's shoulder, as the snow piled up around them and the wind began, finally, mercifully, to fade. By morning, the storm had passed. The world emerged slowly, still and cautious, as if unsure whether the blizzard had truly left. The sky was pale blue and cloudless, almost offensively calm. The snow was deep, untouched, and glittering like crushed glass under the first golden light. Inside the main house, the traveler lay on a cot in the mudroom, wrapped in layers of wool and canvas. A small heater hummed beside them, and the ranch dog, Daisy, lay curled at their feet as if appointed guardian. Jonah sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee that had gone cold while he stared out the window. He hadn't slept. His mind kept replaying the scene from the night before. Rowan emerging from the storm like a ghost, leading a half-conscious human through the trees. How had he known? How far had he gone? And why? A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. One of the ranch hands stepped inside, stomping snow from his boots. "Jonah, you're gonna want to see this." Outside, Rowan stood alone in the snow-covered paddock, his head held high. But this wasn't the usual idle stance of a horse waiting for feed or attention. He was standing over something he'd pawed into the snow. Jonah approached slowly, and when he got close enough, he saw it. A trail. Rowan had retraced his steps. In the snow behind him, clear and deliberate, were two sets of prints, his and the traveler's, winding from the trees across the open field and into the clearing near the shelter. He had carved the path into the snow again, as if saying, "Look, this is where we went. This is how I found them." Jonah exhaled. "You're showing me." Rowan flicked an ear. The ranch hand behind him chuckled softly, but it was an awed sound, not mocking. "I swear, that horse is telling us a story." Jonah nodded. "And we'd be fools not to listen." That afternoon, Rowan rested in the warmth of the barn, blanketed and fed. Lyra stayed close, standing near his stall, keeping a constant eye on him. "You shouldn't have gone out there alone," she said softly. Rowan nuzzled into the hay but didn't answer right away. Finally, he looked at her. "I couldn't ignore it. They were calling. You're lucky to be alive." "So are they." She lowered her head slightly, conceding the point. There was no anger in her tone, only fear. The kind that comes when you realize how easily something precious can be lost. "I'm proud of you," she added, "but you have to know now. This world isn't always kind. Snow like that. It doesn't care who you are." Rowan nodded. He understood that now. The joy of the first snow had melted away. What remained was something heavier, sharper. Later that night, Jonah returned to the barn. He sat quietly beside Rowan's stall, sipping from a mug of warm cider, steam curling up into the rafters. "You're not like the others," he said aloud. "Not because of what you did, because of why." Rowan tilted his head. Jonah looked up at him. "My granddad used to tell me horses were more than just animals. He said if you listened close enough, you could hear their hearts talking. I used to laugh at him." He chuckled softly. "Guess I'm not laughing anymore." He pulled a piece of paper from his coat pocket and unfolded it. A note from the traveler. They were awake now, lucid. Young, maybe 20. No ID, no phone. Just a name. Sky. Sky had been hiking with a group, separated by the storm, disoriented, lost, miles from any trail. They remembered falling, hearing something in the storm, a call, and then a horse. Jonah read the final line aloud. "I think your horse saved my life." He looked up at Rowan again. "No, you did save their life." Over the next few days, the ranch slowly returned to normal. The other horses began venturing back into the fields. Snow melted slightly and trails reopened, but Rowan had changed. Everyone could see it. He moved more deliberately, listened more intently. He no longer chased snowflakes. He watched them fall. Something had awakened in him. Purpose, and it hadn't gone unnoticed. Jonah began to work with him more closely. Not breaking, not training, not in the traditional sense, but partnering, understanding. They went on short rides together, walked the fence lines, checked the trails for new drifts or damage. It wasn't long before Rowan began anticipating Jonah's movements before they happened. The other horses respected him now in a way they hadn't before. He was still young, still wild at heart, but there was gravity in his gaze, the weight of experience. A week later, Sky stepped out into the paddock for the first time since the storm. Jonah walked beside them, careful, watching for signs of dizziness. But Sky was stronger now, and the first place they wanted to go was to see Rowan. Rowan was grazing near the far fence. When he saw Sky approach, he raised his head, ears twitching forward. He walked toward them slowly. Sky extended a hand, and Rowan pressed his muzzle into it. They stood that way for a long moment. No words, just presence. "Thank you," Sky whispered. Rowan blinked slowly. Sky laughed, quiet and bright. "Do you think he remembers?" Jonah nodded. "He doesn't forget." Sky stepped closer and rested a hand on Rowan's neck. "Neither do I." That night, as snow began to fall again, gentler this time, quiet and soft, Rowan stood at the edge of the pasture looking out toward the trees. He didn't fear the snow anymore. He knew now what it was capable of, how it could take and give in equal measure. It was a force, a teacher, and he had survived it. No, more than that. He had faced it. The wind stirred his mane, and he lifted his head to meet it. From deep in the woods, an owl called, and somewhere far away, another storm began to gather, but Rowan didn't flinch. He was ready. 3 weeks had passed since the storm that changed everything. The snow still covered the ranch like a heavy blanket, though it had settled now into softer drifts, crusted with ice at dawn and sparkling under. The afternoon sun. Most days were clear, the sky crisp and cobalt, the kind of blue you only see in winter. Life had not yet returned to normal, because it never truly does after a brush with something that tests you, but it had settled into something new, and Rowan had grown into it. He moved differently now, not just with strength, but with intention. He no longer burst into the pasture with reckless abandon. He observed first, listened, then acted. Lyra, ever watchful, saw the change and said little. It wasn't her place to name what was happening. Growth speaks for itself. Jonah, too, noticed. Every morning he came with the same slow stride and calm voice, but his eyes lingered longer on Rowan now. His hand rested more firmly on the young horse's neck, like a silent acknowledgement. "I see who you're becoming." And Rowan responded in kind. Where once he might have flinched or shifted away, now he leaned into the touch, trusted it. They had begun walking together, Jonah with a rope draped loosely in one hand, Rowan stepping beside him without needing the pull. No commands, no reins, just understanding. But winter, for all its beauty, was not yet finished with them. On the first day of the new snow, the wind returned. Not a blizzard, not a storm, but a slow, creeping chill that whispered through the trees like a warning. The birds were quieter. The deer stayed hidden. Even Daisy, the ranch dog, whined at the door longer than usual before venturing out. Jonah came to the barn early that morning with a serious look on his face. Sky, the young traveler Rowan had rescued, was due to be picked up that afternoon. Ranger from the Park Service was scheduled to drive in from the South Road and escort them back to the regional station, where they could reunite with their group and head home. But the South Road wasn't safe yet. Snowdrifts blocked long stretches. Ice glazed over narrow curves. Jonah had called ahead and received no answer. The wind made the phone lines unpredictable. "Think I should go check it out," he muttered, to himself, patting Rowan's nose absently. Rowan snorted. Jonah paused. "Don't give me that look." He stared into the horse's eyes for a long moment as if seeking approval. He chuckled under his breath. Yeah, I won't do anything stupid." But as Jonah saddled up another horse, a big bay mare named Glory, Rowan watched with increasing unease. Jonah wasn't taking him. That, more than anything, made the hairs rise on Rowan's back. By midday, Jonah hadn't returned. The sky had shifted again, gone from clean winter blue to a dull, heavy slate. The wind carried more urgency now, and small flurries began to dance across the pasture like scouts of a coming force. Inside the ranch house, Sky sat near the fire, watching the flakes through the frosted glass. "He's been gone too long," they said. Daisy growled softly in her sleep. Lyra, standing near the barn door, flicked her ears. She was restless, pawing the ground. Rowan stood beside her, head high, nostrils flaring. "He should have been back by now," Rowan said quietly. "He'll be fine," Lyra murmured. "He's careful, experienced." "But he didn't take me." Lyra looked at him, surprised. "You think you would have helped?" "I know I would have," Rowan said, with no pride in his voice, just certainty. They stood in silence as the wind grew sharper. Beyond the pasture, the forest bent and moaned. The snow thickened, spiraling now with more speed. Inside the house, Skye rose from the chair and grabbed their coat. They opened the door, and the cold blasted in like a slap. "I'm going to look for him." Rowan's ears flicked toward the sound. Skye stepped out onto the porch, pulling gloves tight. Lyra moved closer to the edge of the barn. "You shouldn't go. You're still weak." Skye turned. "I can't sit here and do nothing. He saved me. That horse saved me. I can't let him vanish out there alone." Their voice cracked on the last word. "I'm going." They took one step, then another. Rowan moved. Without a sound, he trotted forward and stepped into Skye's path. Their eyes met again, just as they had the night of the blizzard. Skye blinked. "You want to come with me?" Rowan lowered his head gently, as if bowing, then turned and trotted toward the gate. Skye didn't hesitate. The wind was no longer polite. It screamed through the trees and drove snow sideways in stinging slashes. But Rowan pressed forward. He walked confidently ahead of Skye, forging a path through the deepening snow. Though the wind tried to erase their trail behind them, the young horse left just enough of a mark to follow. Skye struggled to keep up. Their breathing grew ragged. The wind cut through their coat, and visibility dropped to mere feet. But Rowan would not let them fall behind. Every few yards he stopped, waited, let Skye catch up, then continued. They moved like that for what felt like hours. And then, at the crest of a low ridge, Rowan stopped cold. Below them, in the shadow of a fallen pine, was a shape. A horse. Glory. Lying on her side, legs tangled in a twisted fence post and branches, chest heaving with effort. Nearby, half buried in snow, was Jonah. Unconscious, face pale, arm at an unnatural angle. Skye let out a gasp and stumbled forward. Rowan was already moving, galloping down the hill with a speed and grace that defied the snow. He reached Jonah and nudged his face with his muzzle. No response. Skye dropped to their knees beside him, pulling back the scarf to check his breath. It was shallow, faint. "But there, he's alive." Rowan turned to Glory. The mare groaned as she tried to shift, but the branches trapped her. Rowan used his teeth and hooves to pull at the debris, clearing enough for her to lift her head. Skye struggled to wrap Jonah's good arm around their shoulders, but he was heavy, and the snow made footing impossible. "I can't," they gasped. Rowan moved beside them. He knelt. Skye stared. "You want me to—" Rowan waited. With trembling hands, Skye shifted Jonah's body across Rowan's back, using the saddle that had stayed half-buckled in the fall. They secured him as best they could with the reins, knots, and pure desperation. Then Rowan stood. He bore the weight without complaint, and he turned back toward the ranch. The journey home was slow. Every step was agony, for Skye, for Rowan, for Glory limping behind them. But no one gave up. The wind howled, the snow deepened. But they kept going, step by step, until finally the ranch lights pierced the storm, until hands rushed from the porch, grabbing Jonah, shouting his name, pulling him inside, until Skye collapsed on the ground beside Rowan, sobbing with relief. And Rowan, he simply stood there, breathing hard, covered in ice, but unbroken. That night, when the storm passed, Jonah woke. Sky was asleep in the chair beside him. The fire crackled. Daisy's head rested on Jonah's boot. He looked around slowly, pain flaring through his shoulder. Then his eyes landed on Rowan, standing just outside the window, snow dusting his back. Like stars, and he whispered, "You found me." The days that followed were calm. It was the kind of stillness that comes only after a storm. Quiet, thick, almost sacred. The snow no longer threatened but lay heavy and slow, blanketing the hills and valleys with silence. The land, bruised by the winter's rage, had taken a deep breath. Inside the ranch house, the fireplace never stopped burning. Jonah's shoulder had been dislocated, not broken, an injury he accepted with the quiet grit of someone who had spent his life outdoors, a few cracked ribs, a bruised hip, mild frostbite in one hand. Nothing life-threatening. Not anymore. He recovered slowly, with Sky often at his side. They didn't talk much, didn't need to. Between them, there was a reverent understanding. We survived together. But if Jonah was the injured soul mending in the warm house, Rowan was the legend now walking the frozen fields. Everyone on the ranch had heard the full story, how the young horse had not only rescued Sky during the blizzard, but had led them back into the storm to find Jonah and bring him home. Some whispered, it was instinct. Others said luck. But Jonah called it what it was, courage. Rowan didn't act like a hero. He still woke at first light, still followed Lyra into the trees, still ran when the snow was soft and kicked up clouds of white for the sheer joy of movement. But there was a new depth in his eyes, a knowing, a steadiness that hadn't been there before. The other horses noticed. They followed him now, not out of age or dominance, but respect. He had proven himself in the wildest test nature could offer. He had chosen to act, and he had not failed. One morning, as the frost curled into the window panes and the trees stood bare and silver, Jonah stepped out onto the porch. His arm was still, in a sling. His walk was stiff, but his face carried something light, something close to peace. Rowan stood at the far edge of the pasture, nose buried in the snow, sniffing for the last blades of sleeping grass. Jonah gave a low whistle. Rowan's ears perked up. He turned. The man didn't wave or call again. He just waited. Rowan started forward, walking across the field like he belonged to every inch of it. When he reached the porch, Jonah stepped down the wooden stairs slowly. With his good hand, he reached out and ran his fingers along Rowan's jawline. "Hey, partner," he said. Rowan leaned into the touch. Jonah smiled. "How'd you know where I was?" Rowan blinked. "Did you hear me? Did you feel it? Something in the snow? The wind?" He chuckled softly. "Or maybe you just knew." They stood there in silence for a long time. Behind them, Sky watched from the kitchen window. Later that week, Sky made a decision. They were supposed to leave. The ranger had returned, the snowplows had cleared the road, and the rest of Sky's hiking group had been located safely, already flown back home. But something kept Sky on the ranch. Not duty, not fear. Something deeper. Connection. They approached Jonah one morning, bundled in a heavy flannel coat, cheeks red from the cold. "I want to stay," they said. Jonah looked up from where he was, mending a broken fence latch. "Stay?" "Just for the season. I can help. You need an extra hand, don't you?" He didn't answer right away. He studied them the way one studies the weather, looking for signs, reading the air. Finally, he nodded. "You ever muck a stall?" Sky smiled. "No." "Good," Jonah said. "You'll learn." And so the rhythm of winter continued. Sky became part of the life of the ranch, learning the slow, deliberate rituals that made each day work. Feeding, watering, cleaning, patching. The kind of work that leaves your hands rough and your sleep deep. They spent most of their time with Rowan. The young horse responded to them with surprising ease. He let Sky brush him, walk him, even ride him, though cautiously. Not out of fear, but out of respect. There was trust between them, forged in cold and fire. One afternoon, Jonah found them in the field. Sky sat on a low stump, Rowan standing close, head bowed. The wind was gentle that day, teasing the snow into little spirals. Across the ground, Jonah watched for a long moment before calling out, "You two look like you're plotting something." Sky looked over, grinning. "We might be." Jonah leaned against the fence post. "He likes you." Sky looked at Rowan, then back. "I like him." Jonah nodded. "You ever think animals choose us? Not the other way around?" Sky didn't hesitate. "I know they do." The snow continued to fall in waves. Some days it came as a soft curtain, gentle and beautiful. Other days it arrived with teeth, howling and wild. But through it all, Rowan stayed close to the land. He seemed to read it better now, when a storm was coming, when it was safe to run, when to press close and wait. He taught Sky, too. One morning they were walking the North Trail together, Jonah a few paces behind, when Rowan suddenly stopped. Cold, ears forward, body frozen. Sky stopped too, heart skipping. "What is it?" Rowan snorted once, a low warning. A few seconds later the sound came, a sharp crack, then the deep whump of shifting snow. A tree branch loaded with ice dropped. Ahead of them, crashing into the path exactly where they'd been heading. Jonah caught up, breathless. "You okay?" Sky pointed at Rowan. "He stopped me. He knew." Jonah nodded, rubbing Rowan's neck. "That's your third warning this week. You keep this up, we'll start calling you a weatherman." Rowan flicked an ear in amusement. The weeks rolled on. Rowan began ranging farther from the barn. He explored the woods more, checked the creek for new ice, sniffed the wind with a seriousness that made even the older horses fall silent. It was as if he had become a sentinel, not just for the herd, but for the land itself, Lyra noticed. One evening, as the stars came out and the sky turned black as ink, she stood beside Rowan at the edge of the forest. "You've grown," she said softly. Rowan didn't respond. Not just taller, wiser, stronger. He looked over at her. "I never told you this," Lyra said. "But when you were born, I had a feeling, a sense that you'd do something different." Rowan lowered his head slightly. "I didn't know what. Not then. But now I think you were meant to be more than just one of us. You were meant to be something we all look toward." He nuzzled her gently. "I'm still just me." "Maybe," she said. "But now that means more than it used to." One night, under a moon so bright it lit the snow like glass, Jonah, Sky, and Rowan stood together at the top of the ridge. Below them, the ranch lay quiet. Glowing windows, curled smoke, sleeping horses. "Spring will come soon," Jonah said, eyes on the horizon. Sky nodded. "But I think I'll miss the snow." Jonah raised a brow. "Even after all it took from you?" Sky smiled faintly. "It gave more than it took." They looked at Rowan. The young horse stood tall, ears alert, mane tugged gently by the night wind. He looked back at them, not as a horse, as something more. The wind had changed. It still moved through the trees, still tugged at the grass and snowdrifts, but something in its voice had softened. No longer a warning or a howl. Now it whispered, nudged, promised. Winter wasn't over, not yet, but it was loosening its grip, and Rowan could feel it. The snow was retreating, slowly, in thin, shrinking layers. The creeks had begun to murmur, again beneath the ice, trickling just under the surface, waiting for their moment to rise. The trees hadn't budded yet, but their branches swayed differently, more awake. And the sun, though still pale and shy, lingered longer each day. It was the beginning of the end. Rowan stood alone near the edge of the forest, nose lifted to the breeze. His coat was thick from the long cold, but his breath no longer misted, in great clouds. He could smell the wetness in the dirt, the hints of moss reawakening, the faintest scent of thaw, and he could feel something else too, a shift, not just in the seasons, but in him. Back at the ranch, life had slipped into a rhythm again. Sky had become an unofficial part of the crew, cleaning stalls, repairing fences, hauling feed buckets with hands that had grown calloused and sure. They still didn't say much about what had happened in the storm, but every so often they'd glance at Rowan in a moment of stillness and give a small, knowing smile. Jonah had made a full recovery. His sling was gone, his limp barely noticeable. But he, too, had changed. He talked to Rowan differently now, not like a trainer to a horse or even a man to an animal, but like one soul to another. "I never believed in fate before," Jonah said one morning, running a hand down Rowan's back. "But it's hard to argue with it when it looks you in the eye and saves your life." Rowan blinked slowly. Sky approached from the house with 2 mugs of coffee, one of which they offered to Jonah. "He's watching the hills again," they said quietly. Jonah nodded. "Like he's waiting for something." Sky followed Rowan's gaze. Or someone. That someone came 2 days later. A red pickup truck pulled into the snowy driveway just after dawn. It was still early, the frost still clinging to the eaves, and the animals had just begun to stir. The truck door opened, and a tall woman stepped out, boots crunching over ice. Sky stood frozen on the porch. Their hands gripped the railing. The woman approached, cautious but smiling. Her voice cracked as she said, "Sky?" Sky didn't answer. Just ran. They collided in a hug halfway down the walk. Jonah, standing in the doorway, lowered his hat respectfully and turned away. Rowan watched from the pasture. He didn't move. But something in him settled. Sky returned to the porch half an hour later, cheeks red from wind and tears. "That's my mom," they said simply. Jonah smiled. "She's got your jawline." Sky chuckled softly. "I should go," they added. Jonah nodded. "I know." Then after a pause, "You'll be back." Sky looked at Rowan. "Yeah, I think I will." Sky left at noon. The snow had melted off the driveway, just enough to let the tires find grip. The truck pulled away slowly, crunching over the half-melted gravel path, turning out toward the open road. Sky leaned out the window and waved. Rowan watched until the dust vanished over the hill, then he turned toward the woods. That evening, Jonah found him standing near the creek. The snowbanks had receded, revealing long-forgotten stones and tufts of last year's grass. Water gurgled under a thin shell of ice. Rowan was staring into the trees, ears forward. Jonah walked up and scratched the back of Rowan's neck. "You're restless," he said. Rowan didn't move. Jonah sighed and looked into the forest. "It's early, you know. Still weeks before. Anything's green." Rowan took a single step forward. "You going somewhere?" Another step. Jonah rubbed his beard. "You know the herd will follow you." Rowan flicked his ears. "I suppose," Jonah added with a smile. "That's the point." The next morning, Lyra found him. He was standing near the path that led out of the pasture, toward the hills, the forests, the world beyond the ranch. She approached slowly, her steps measured. "You're leaving," she said. Rowan nodded. "Why?" "I don't know," he said honestly, "but something's pulling me." Lyra stood beside him in silence. She looked at the trees, at the faint trail that led into the distance. "It's too early for travel. The snow's still heavy. Food is scarce." "I know." She turned her gaze to him. "And yet?" "I feel it," Rowan said. "Like I felt the storm coming, like I knew where to find Sky. Like I knew Jonah was hurt. I can't explain it. Lyra studied him. Then she smiled. Then go. Rowan blinked. You were never meant to stay here forever, Rowan, she said. You were born here, raised here, but you were meant for more. He lowered his head. You'll be okay? I'll be proud. By the end of that week, the snow began to fall again, softly this time. Not a storm. A farewell. And Rowan was ready. He stood at the trailhead just after dawn, the rising sun bathing the hills in pink and gold. Behind him, the ranch slumbered, still and quiet. Ahead, the trees opened into endless unknowns. Jonah came to him one last time. He didn't bring a rope. No bridle. No saddle. Just a quiet presence. He stood beside Rowan and placed a hand over the horse's chest. You saved 2 people's lives this winter, he said, and I reckon that's just the start of what you're meant to do. Rowan pressed, his forehead gently to Jonah's. Thank you, the man whispered. Then he stepped back, and Rowan walked forward. He moved through the trees like something born from them. Silent, sure. He didn't know where he was going, didn't know what he would find, but he knew the land would guide him. The wind would speak to him, and he would listen. Epilogue. The stories came slowly, scattered like snowflakes on the wind. A trapped elk freed from a frozen stream by a mysterious young stallion. A boy lost in the woods, guided back to his family by a silent, dark-eyed horse. A wild herd seen moving through distant valleys, always led by one, tall, strong, with a streak of white across his chest. They whispered about him, the horse who knew, the horse who found, the horse who saved. And somewhere, far from fences and ranches and houses, Rowan galloped across the thawing land, his hooves churning up. The last of the snow. Spring was coming, and he was already there.